All right, here we are. In a little bit early tonight. There's a storm outside tonight, and even under the best circumstances here, we have a little bit of an iffy interwebs connection. So I hope that the quality of the broadcast is not too bad tonight. I think that at some point I'm going to have to just give up on all the local ISPs and go with Starlink. We looked into that. It's spendy. It's about a $500 initial investment, and then it's spendy every month too. It's around $100 a month. But if they can get me what I need and make it reliable, it might be just the ticket. Please remember tonight when you log in to give StreamYard access to your credentials. Let them know who you are on Facebook so that if you ask questions, your name actually pops up instead of it just saying unknown user, which is what I see if you don't grant StreamYard credentials. So let's try it out. Who's out there? I see that the room's starting to populate. We got some folks already showing up. Wave at me if you're already in here so I can see who's there. $7 o'clock. Holy cow, I hear the bells chiming already. Well, let's get going. I told everybody what we were going to do tonight on PBR Monday is just start from zero. Pretend like you don't know anything about the tour of Idaho. And hey, Ralph, how you doing, buddy? And we'll just go from there. I want to. I know that I'm reinventing the wheel for a lot of you. You've been around for a long time. You followed last year. You followed the Hot Stove League over the winter. But let's just start from zero and talk about what the Tour of Idaho is and furthermore what it is not. And let's start with what it is not first. It's not like anything else. And it is especially not like a backcountry discovery route or a Transamerica tour or anything like that. It's not like the Cat if you're from back in Kentucky. Those are all wonderful endeavors in their own right, especially the Cat, which is run by friends of mine. I have the utmost respect for what those folks have done. I know the people in the backcountry discovery route business. They're all wonderful people, and they provide something that I think is brilliant for our industry. It's a good time. You can go on these rides, and they're just a ton of fun. But those are basically routes that, everything's kind of laid out for you. There's a lot of navigation information out there, and tracks are generally provided for all those routes. And even if the progenitors of those adventures do not provide the tracks, which as far as I'm aware, in all cases they do, you could go on the internet and you could find tracks. So navigation is not an issue for any of those rides. What the people that design those rides want you to be able to do is just show up and do the ride and have a good time. Wonderful. I think it's wonderful what those folks have done. They bring a lot of people to underserved areas, they increase tourism, and they make motorcycle riding fun, and I'm all for that. But that's not what the Tour of Idaho is. The Tour of Idaho is something that is different, and it's considerably different. The Tour of Idaho has always been the kind of thing that I envisioned as is more than just a motorcycle ride. It is a complete outdoor adventure. And when I put together the Tour of Idaho, you looked at my own background and just synthesized various skills that I had from things that I had been interested in my entire life. And I've always been interested in the outdoors ever since I was a little kid. I just returned from a month-long vacation to Florida, and I spent 6 years in Florida growing up, grades 1 through 6. And I took my family out and showed them where I used to ride bicycles in what were then swamps or now neighborhoods. And, we'd take maps and figure out ways to ride down dirt roads and across dikes and levees in the swamps and stuff. We had great adventures doing that. Later on, I went to the University of Kentucky, and one of the things I majored in geology, and there I learned a lot about reading maps, not just geological maps, but also topographic maps. And at one point, I was actually involved in a project to make topographic maps of areas in Kentucky. So the ability to read a map is something that I've always had, and it's something that I find to be important. When we first started doing the Tour of Idaho, there were GPS units out there, but that was 16, 17 years ago, and they weren't nearly as advanced as they are now. And basically, I found them relatively useless in the backcountry. So when we first started putting together the tour, we did it with topographic maps, which was the way I felt comfortable. When I was mountaineering in Canada and Alaska, I used topographic maps to plot the ways that I was going to approach the big wall climbs and the mountain climbs I wanted to do. So I've always felt pretty good about that. And when we started developing the Tour of Idaho, we did it with topographic maps. And those of you who have been around for a while know the story that the first time I did the Tour of Idaho, I took a topographic map set with me in an aluminum map box. And that's the way I navigated. I'd spent an entire winter basically memorizing the route, even going so far as to use some software that I had to do fly-throughs through the route. So I kind of had a little bit of familiarity about how I thought things were going to look. But it wasn't like the stuff they have now where you can actually look at realistic three-dimensional views of the terrain. It was pretty crude, but it was still enough for me to know, look, I'm going to go down this valley for a long way and it's going to be relatively flat. Then at the end, I'm looking for a valley that's at about northwest or something like that. It's going to come in at about my 2 o'clock. Those were things that I made mental notes of and actually wrote some things down, and that's the way I navigated the tour. I got out maps and I read them. And that pretty much is always the way that I personally have done it. So the tour really started becoming popular, even though it's been around since 2005. It really started getting popular around 2010, 2011. And one of the first things that I did was I would start publishing these lists, or I wouldn't publish tracks. I would publish waypoint files, and I had a ton of waypoints in them. In the beginning, I would put a waypoint, every third of a mile or something like that, or maybe every half mile. If it was out in the desert where you need a few of them, it might be every couple of miles if you're going down straight roads. But I've provided breadcrumbs, and what I did was just basically use the mapping software that I had to put down the waypoints where it thought they would be helpful. And it has an algorithm for doing that. And it was fairly successful, but it resulted in these humongous files. And what I told people was, look, use my files as a starting point, but just remove the waypoints you don't think that you're going to need. Well, that proved to be a bridge too far for a lot of people. They would not want to go in and work with the files or modify them in any way. They just try to download them. They ran into problems with memory on a lot of GPS units because a waypoint is not like a track point. A waypoint has an awful lot of information associated with it. And so when you start trying to cram a bunch of waypoints into a file, it takes up way more space than the track points, which are created when your GPS logs its location when you're using it. So, we tried to explain the difference between waypoints and track points, tracks and routes and all that stuff to people, and it never went anywhere. People, they want it to be simple. A little bit of an aside, Kent Aness, tour veteran, friend of mine from Kentucky, sent me a little thing a couple weeks ago. There's some guy on some web forum somewhere raging about how he's all over motorcyclejazz.com, wants to do the Tour of Idaho, but he can't find any tracks. He wants to know why he has to read so much, and he read all this stuff, and there's no tracks. Well, first of all, he must not have read it very well because we explained that there are no tracks of why, and no routes either. But that's not the kind of guy that wants to come and do this. We didn't design this for that person. That person would be much better served doing the Idaho Backcountry Discovery Route, doing the CAT or something like that. There are other people out there who cater to people that don't want to worry about the navigation, that just want to go out and have fun, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you're in the wrong place if you're expecting that here. We don't provide that. What we want you to do is we want you to think about navigation, and in a way, as far as I'm concerned, and since I'm the guy that puts this together, my concern is valid, and ultimately it's going to determine how things work out. The ability to have to navigate is rewarding all by itself. It adds something to it. Not only do you have to be able to ride a motorcycle, but it's like playing a chess game. You got to be able to think a little bit about what's going on, and you have to be able to do it on the fly. The days are really long, and you can't afford to spend a lot of time lost. You can't keep stopping to look at your GPS all the time. You kind of got to keep rolling to get through the days. So if you're preparing for this the way we recommend that you do, and people have been very good about this the last half dozen years or so, you spend all winter looking over the route, looking over the waypoint files that we load up, and I usually don't get them up until this time of year. I'm almost done for this year. I put up day 8 today. I'll have day 9 and day 10 sometime in the next couple of days. So the waypoint files will be out there, but what people have been doing is studying last year's route, which is very close to this year's route, and that's fine. But you get to spend months and months and months wherever you're at, Florida, Kentucky, Georgia, Europe, any of these, lots of places in Canada. People have come to do the tour from all over the place. The cool thing about the navigation being an issue is it involves you in the tour months before you get here, which to me is a bonus. The first few times we did the tour, I sat down at my favorite local coffee shop for hours every day with maps spread all over the table, plotting the route, looking at the best way to get from point A to point B. Now, I've already done that for you now because you have waypoint files out there, but your responsibility is to reconcile those waypoints with reality. And these days, it's really easy to do that. There's brilliant mapping programs. I use CalTopo, which I think is great. I pull up the Google satellite layer. I also pull up the topographic map layer, the multi-vehicle use maps, and I superimpose all those together, and I use those to check the placement of the waypoints. I spend more time every year. I should say I increase the amount of time I spend every year working on these just because I really want you to feel comfortable that those waypoints are where they need to be. Now, there's a lot of them out there. There's still, I think there's 1,200 waypoints or something like that in the whole 10 days. So there's a lot of them out there, but I have looked at every one of those waypoints and I've reconciled them against topographic maps, aerial photos, the MVUM maps, every resource that I have, and I have painstakingly made sure that I think those waypoints are where they need to be. So instead of having a red line on a map, or instead of having a trail of breadcrumbs, you have waypoints, and you have to navigate from one waypoint to the next. And if you spent very much time looking at how I place the waypoints, they're there to guide you. So rarely will you find a waypoint smack dab in the middle of an intersection somewhere. It's usually just beyond the intersection along the route that you need to follow out of that intersection. If it's sitting smack dab in the middle of the intersection, there's a reason for that. I put one there today on day 8. You're going to look at day 8, and you're going to see that one of the waypoints later in the day is literally smack dab in the middle of an intersection on one of the routes. The reason for that is there's a humongous signboard in the middle of that intersection that's got maps because it's like an 8-way intersection. So there's a big signboard there, and it's got some history and some cool stuff that I think you ought to read, but it'll also tell you which way to go. So I thought about every one of these waypoints. Doesn't mean that I didn't make any mistakes in doing it, but I check these things over and over and over again, and I look at them hard. And generally, I did not put a waypoint someplace that I wasn't sure the trail, you're going to roll right over it. In 1,200 waypoints, I can't guarantee that one of them's not going to be a few feet off the trail somewhere in the bushes. But for the most part, if you're looking at these things, you're going to see that they're right in the middle of the trail. You should roll right over them. And if one's way off somewhere, you might want to think about whether or not you're in the right place. In some cases, it's just a mistake. But in other cases, it might be that there's two trails that parallel each other and you may be on the wrong one. We'll go through that as we go through the 2021 tour route day by day. So why do all of this? Why not just make it like a backcountry discovery ride? Well, I'll tell you honestly, it's because anybody can do a backcountry discovery ride. The easier you can dispatch something like that, the less memorable that it is. And what I want the Tour of Idaho to be is, I don't want it to be a high volume endeavor. I don't want it to be a BDR. I don't want thousands of people showing up. I have everything I need in life. I have a wonderful family. I live in a great place. My life is happy. I have all the friends I can handle. I don't need the fame and fortune associated with being, the guy that authors some red hot route or something like that. What I want is I want people to come here that understand what an accomplishment it would be in order to get through this the way we have it set up. In 15 years, there's been less than 100 people that have succeeded in the Tour of Idaho, and that is not for lack of trying. The past few years, the success rate has gone up a little bit. For a long time, it hovered down around 10%. It's up around 20, 25% now. And that's because the teams that show up are starting to show up better and better prepared. The word's kind of gotten out that, look, this thing's for real. The people that do this do know what they're doing. It's different, but it's different deliberately. It's not just because they don't know how to create tracks or routes or something like that. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't like what we do, and that's fine. Just don't do it, or go do it by your own rules. There's nothing wrong with using our data any way you want. There's nothing wrong with building your own tracks and routes and just going out and doing it any way you want. Except for about 25 feet, everything on the Tour of Idaho is on public land. And it's public land for a reason. You pay for it, you can use it whatever way you want. But the Tour of Idaho is not public. The Tour of Idaho is an invention of human beings, myself and many others that have contributed to it over the years. And we want you to feel when you pull up to Sundance Mountain sometime in the middle of day 10, like you really accomplished something. And almost to the person, people who finished the Tour of Idaho tell me that it was one of the greatest achievements of their outdoor life. They rant and rave. We talk about it all winter long. Some of the best friends I've made were people I didn't know before they came along and did the tour. And after they did it, we all become great friends because everybody knows what you did while you're out there. And it's more than just the ability to ride a motorcycle. We get people that are brilliant motorcycle riders that show up all the time and they fail. And they fail because they didn't understand how hard the rest of the stuff was. They didn't understand anything about navigation, or they didn't understand anything about packing light. This is a 10-day-long adventure in the mountains in very remote terrain. And I would say in most ways, your ability to ride a motorcycle is not the most important thing in determining your eventual success or failure. So you could be every kind of hot shit on a motorcycle in the world. You could still get your butt handed to you in this because you didn't know how to read a map or how to navigate. And following Google Voice is not navigation. Following a line on a map is not navigation, or on your GPS. Navigation is knowing which way is north, south, east, and west, having an idea of where you are in three-dimensional and topographic space, and being able to get from where you are to where you want to go using various cues. That's navigation. Navigation is not driving along your car and listening to Google say, in 0.3 of a mile, turn right. That's something else. I don't know what it is, but it's not navigation. Or if it is, it's navigation at a very low level. And to complete the tour, we require navigation at a very high level. Now, again, there are esoteric reasons for this, the accomplishment part of it, but there are some practical reasons for that as well. And the practical reason is these trails change all the time. Every year I go out and somebody's rerouted a trail somewhere. Where I have put the waypoints, I am very confident there's still trail there. But things may have changed in between. Something washes out, somebody changes a few switchbacks around. And back in the days when I used to provide an awful lot of waypoints, what I would find is if one of those waypoints was off somewhere, people would just stop right there. They go, well, his waypoints are wrong. This whole thing's invalid. I can't do it anymore. The number of times we had people do crazy things like, a trail would be closed and they would have opened a new trail 30 feet away, just moved the trailhead or something. And people would, ride over barricades to ride the old trail is the stuff of legend. So we just said, look, we're going to stop all that. We're just going to make you think about navigation. And that way, when you get out in the woods, if something happens, you're going to understand. You're going to have a 30,000-foot view of what this whole thing is, and you're going to be able to figure it out. And you'll be a lot happier because instead of your eyes glued to your GPS, you could be looking around at where you are. You're in the middle of Idaho. It's a wonderful experience, and you're going to have a great time. So that's why we do things the way we do. That's why there's some standards and some rules you have to follow. Look, in these days and times, motorcycles are really good and GPS units are really good. I'm, doing a backcountry discovery route, kind of a ride, is a wonderful experience, but it's not exactly an accomplishment of boundless magnitude. Should you feel good about doing a BDR? Sure you should. You had a good time. You're out there with your brothers and sisters riding along. You're riding motorcycles in the outdoors. You're getting to meet new people. What's wrong with any of that? Nothing. But if you're looking to do a bucket list kind of a ride, you're probably not going to find that in a BDR. They're just not that hard. They're not set up to be difficult. They're set up so that The average person on a dual sport motorcycle with the right kind of equipment can get through the thing pretty easily. There's not a lot of challenge in any of those. In the Tour of Idaho, it's not that way at all. The days are really long. There's not a day in the Tour of Idaho when you won't be happy to see the end of the day. It can be really hot. It can be really cold. We have people that are equally affected by heat prostration and hypothermia. We've seen both. We've seen teams have to retire because one day they were riding through 104-degree temperatures, and 2 days later they were riding through snow. It's everything about the whole tour. None of the trails on the tour outside the challenge sections I even find to be particularly difficult, and I'm not that great of a rider. I'm a very much intermediate level dirt bike rider. But I can ride all the trails that are on the tour, including the challenge sections. Now, some of the challenge sections are a little hairball, especially if you're solo. If you're with other people, you should be able to get through everything just fine. But if you're by yourself, a couple of those challenge sections, and I'm thinking the one on day 1, the one on day 8, the one on day 9, and then the one on day 4, the Custer Lookout one. Those are pretty hairball if you're by yourself. There's some exposure, and in a couple places there's some switchbacks. There's some muscular effort that's going to be required in a couple of those places. Wicked side hilling with exposure and consequences due to a fall. So if you're by yourself, yeah, some of that stuff is a little bit scary, but it's still technically not that difficult. It's not like, except maybe for short sections. So it's not like riding Erzberg for miles. It might be like riding Erzberg for 30 or 40 feet occasionally, but most of the challenge sections even are kind of mellow. So a person of decent motorcycle riding ability probably has the motorcycle riding skills to do this. It's the rest of the stuff that's going to tell you, that's going to determine whether or not you make it. How efficient were you in your navigation? Did you pack lightly, which hardly anybody does? Was your motorcycle well sorted out? Did you show up on a bike that had good tires on it and, the suspension was basically set? The number of people that show up here on a bike and they haven't touched anything on the suspension after loading 30 or 40 pounds of stuff on it is amazing. Your suspension is going to respond completely different on a fully loaded tour bike. You got 4 or 5 gallons of gas, 30 or 40 pounds of gear. That's a lot of stuff. It changes the way the suspension on the motorcycle works. So you got to talk to Alex Martin down at Conflict and get him to dial your suspension, or somebody else that knows as much about it as Alex does. Before you show up here, you got to ride around on it a little bit to see how the bike feels with all that stuff. We get people that show up here all the time that have never used the GPS unit or the personal locator beacon they are going to use on the tour before they get it out the night before in the Hotel Malad. Then the first day, their PLB's not pinging at 2-minute intervals or 10-minute intervals. It's just a mess. We see all kinds of stuff where people had months and months and months to sort some things out and they didn't do it. But those are generally the people that don't get very far. The people that have worked through all that stuff, have really planned intelligently, got their bikes sorted out, got their rigs sorted out. They've thought everything from how they're going to deal with the heat and the cold, because you're going to see both. Possibly a lot of precipitation. There's good ways to deal with that and not so good ways. If you're on a team, how much time have you and your partner spent under really stressful circumstances? I see people that show up here and they're riding in a team of 3 and, they found the other 2 guys on the internet somewhere. They've never ridden with these guys. And that may work, but it has worked, in fact, a couple of times. But the people that made that work were extraordinary individuals. So there's a lot that goes into this, and most of the things that are going to knacker you can knacker you months before you actually show up here. Lack of planning, lack of preparation, lack of desire to actually learn how to navigate. If I got to drag you kicking and screaming through all this navigation stuff, you really should think about doing something else. Either embrace it or go away and do something else, because if you come into this kicking and screaming, that guy doesn't know what he's doing, this is all horse shit, and I don't like it, and I'm going to secretly create my own routes, and he's not going to know about it. Well, I am going to know about it, and the fact that you feel necessary to do all that means you're just not right for this. And I don't know why you're here in the first place if that's it. This is something for people who want a big challenge and a big adventure, and that's why it's put together the way it is. It's a huge challenge, and it's a wonderful adventure if you avail yourself to it. There's two ways you can respond to a challenge. You can rise to it, or you can try to drag it down to your level. And a lot of people do the latter. They generally don't get very far. A few of those people have managed to somehow ride the entire tour route. Then they were angry when we said, look, we know what you did. We know you had a team of bigger than 3. We know you had help. And then they go around, they spend the rest of their life talking trash on the internet. I don't care about any of that. Like I said, I'm the perfect guy to do this just because my superpower is that I don't give a shit about what people say on the internet. I really don't. I've been writing a newspaper column for 25 years. I taught at a university for 25 years, and all that stuff makes you bulletproof to things like that. I pay attention to criticism when it's coming from people that I respect, and I talk to a lot of people that I respect who are way better at this kind of stuff than me when I'm putting this thing together every year. So I bounce ideas off other people. This is not done in a vacuum. But that is a fairly small number of people that I talk to. It's people that I trust, people that I know understand what goes into doing something like this and running an event like this. And then the last thing is, this doesn't cost you a dime that goes to me or really anybody else that's just associated with planning the tour. This is a free event. There's no entry fee. We don't get permits or anything because it's not really an event that we charge any money for. It's you get from point A to point B following this set of standards. We give you a jersey number. That's it. The people that make the money along the tour are merchants. They're people in the industry. So they're either vendors that are supplying you with the various products that you're going to use to do the tour, or they're merchants along the way. And I am absolutely shameless about promoting the merchants along the way, the folks that help us out with this. When you go see Donna at the Ryan Hotel, or you go see Kaylin and her crew at Smoky Bar Store, you are patronizing small businesses that desperately need your business. And Tour of Idaho riders have been generous through the years. They've really taken care of those folks. I really appreciate it. Very rarely do we have any trouble with legitimate tour riders. We have trouble with people who show up and are sort of pretend Tour of Idaho riders. They're kind of following the route, but they're doing their own deal, something that we call a T2. I am aware that last year there were some rescues of T2 riders. And one of the reasons that I was always reluctant to sort of sanction a T2 is exactly what happened last summer. You get people that show up, they really haven't prepared properly, which is why they're doing a T2 probably in the first place. They go out, they get lost, they call search and rescue. They tell them that, I was doing the Tour of Idaho and this thing is all messed up. And the next thing I know, I start getting calls from sheriffs and authorities and stuff like that. What are you doing here? So that's why I was always reluctant to sanction a T2, but I did it just because I think there ought to be something for people that just want to go do it in their own terms. I respect that. I know that it's going to create a lot of trouble, but there are still some people that have done T2s in the past. I think they had a good time. They rode the whole route. They did it in reasonably good style, albeit by their own standards. I don't see anything wrong with that. If those people felt good about what they did, they didn't cause any trouble with anybody, me or any of the merchants along the way, well, good on them. Good for you. You had a good time. You got to experience a pretty good chunk of what the tour is all about. Even if you had support, even if you had help along the way, even if you didn't ride the entire route, proportionally you did something. But to do the entire tour experience is really, really tough. And I don't think you're going to run into any tour veteran that's going to tell you anything other than that. A lot of them showed up, at my house at the end of day one, and they're kind of like, yeah, well, we're pretty sure we could knock this off. But if they still feel that way by the end of day one, pardon me, they don't feel that way by the end of day 10 because pretty much everybody's knackered. In a lifetime of mountaineering and, some pretty extreme things in the mountains, skiing, big, long skiing trips and things like that, I'll tell you this, the Tour of Idaho is probably the hardest thing I ever did. It's harder than any big wall climb I ever did, harder than any mountaineering expedition I was ever a part of. The Tour of Idaho will wear you out. And it wears you out not just physically, it wears you out mentally. It's nearly 2,000 miles through the middle of nowhere, and lots of things have to go right in order for you to succeed. When they don't, on the fly, in the middle of nowhere, with every endorphin in your body trying to jump out of your bloodstream and into the air. You got to make good decisions. So when you have a flat, instead of freaking out, you got to sit down and actually figure out what's the best way for me to do this. That's the reason I preach keep things really simple. The more complex systems you have, the more time you're going to have to figure out what to do when things go wrong. If you keep things really simple, it makes that decision-making tree a lot easier when you need to do it. So I'm going to look here at some questions here and see if anything's come up so far. Jeff, I see you're there. It's a surreal experience. Yes, it is. Jeff, I suspect that's you with that hot then freezing comment. Wears you out mentally? Yep. Well, there you go. So I don't see any questions in there. I see quite a few comments. So that's pretty much the vision of the tour, what it's all about. And again, I'm not backing down from any of the standards. I don't care who doesn't like it. If you don't like it, don't come. You'll be treated very well by everybody that's here when you show up. People from one end of the state to the other are cheering for your success because everybody knows how hard it is. Look, these guys at the local shops around here, they're all great riders. I've ridden with all those guys, and they're wonderful. They're all way better than me. Ain't none of them doing this. They think you guys are nuts for going out and trying to ride 2,000 miles with a lot of single track. And some of the trails, I don't think any of them are living on the edge of death, but some of them are a little hairball and sketchy in places, and you're riding them with loaded motorcycles. There are people around here that are pretty good dirt bikers that don't ride their dirt bike the length of trails in an entire summer that you will ride in the first 2 days. The first 2 days of the Tour of Idaho, you're going to ride nearly 300 miles. There are guys that don't ride that much single track all season long around here that are decent riders. So it's a lot. It's a huge accomplishment. And even if you don't finish, it's still a huge accomplishment. And it says something about you, I think, as a human being that you said, you know what, I think I'm going to do this. I don't know if I can make it, but maybe I'm less worried about failure than I am worried about not even wanting to give it a shot. I think that says a lot for you that you'd show up here and you'd give it a try. Some of my favorite people are people that showed up, tried the tour, gave it a pretty good go, but something went wrong. They had some bad luck, or sometimes it was just their planning was bad. And they had to retire. But you know what? They didn't piss, moan, and complain about it. They said, that was the best 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days of riding we ever had. In some cases, they come back the next year or the year after that and say succeed. But in some cases, they go, you know what? I'm really happy with what I accomplished. Thank you. And they follow the tour every year. And they're some of my best friends. I've met a ton of people like that came out, gave it a pretty good shot, had a great time. Some of them came back, and again, some of them said, no, I got everything I needed out of it that one time I was out there. Good for them. They had a good time, and it's a memorable experience. It's one of those kind of things when you're sitting around on a cold night and it's snowing outside, you pull up your pictures and you're looking at that and you were going, that's cool. I had a really good time doing that. That's why we're all here. Everyone here wants you to have fun, and that's the only thing anybody cares about. If you're having fun, win, lose, draw, mission accomplished. That's what we wanted. We wanted you to come here and enjoy yourself. Then the second thing we want you to do is come here and spend a lot of money with these businesses along the way because they need your help. Now, a little bit about the vendors that we recommend for the tour. I have a relationship with all of them, and they're my friends. They don't all give me deals or give me free equipment and stuff like that. Occasionally, I get a piece of equipment because I ride enough that some of these companies value my input. And I'm a physicist, so I have a little bit of a background to do technical evaluations on equipment. But not all of them do. When I recommend a vendor for the Tour of Idaho, it's because I think they make kick-ass stuff that you need, and that's it. Doesn't mean they're the only people that do that. But for what we do here, I think that particular vendor is probably the shiz nizzle. So all of you know that I have a good relationship with Climb. I've worked with those guys as an outside consultant for years. I work with them on events occasionally. Their stuff is it's killer stuff. They really put a lot of thought into what they're doing. They respond to feedback. They just sent me some color samples of some gear that they're coming out with this year that, guess what, is light color. They got a bunch of light gray swatches and some of this stuff. which those of you who know me know I've been ranting and raving about for years. Lighter colors in gear so that it can keep you cooler when you're riding with it in the sun. Well, Climb did all that. Giant loop. The bags that Harold makes they're wonderfully made, and they're perfect for the kind of riding we do. Lots of people make brilliant luggage for motorcycles. You could throw a rock up in the air and it's going to land on somebody that makes motorcycle luggage. But giant loop bags have some particular features that make them very well suited to the type of riding that we do on the tour. And that's why I like that. Harold and I have been talking for years about luggage and designs and what it needs to do. And he's got several niches that he sells luggage for, but for really technical riding where you're trying to go really light and you're trying to do big distances, going as light as you can go, and the stuff's got to be rugged and reliable. You got to be able to drag it over rocks. The profile's got to be such that things don't stick out at weird angles. He's kind of got that stuff knocked. And for what we do, again, I think that Harold's bags are the best. You may disagree, and that's fine. But I tell you what, there's nobody that's ever shown up to do the tour with a set of giant loop bags that got to the end of it and said, I wish I'd had something else. I can't say that about other manufacturers. A lot of people that come back that second year come back and they're wearing giant loop stuff on their motorcycle instead of whatever they had before. So I don't do that because that person gives me kickbacks on gear. That company does something for me. I do it because they do something for you. I don't need anybody's money. My family and I are doing just fine. We have been for many years. My life is pretty much set from now until the time that I go to the great wheel in the sky. What I want is for you guys to get out there and your equipment not to be an issue. And if you kind of listen to the wisdom of all the people who have done the tour, who you could talk to in the forum, I look over in that forum and I see most of the advice you're getting there is pretty sound about what equipment to use and why. That's another thing that people fight. Well, I've always used this, and they want to argue, and I've given up on that. The running joke around here is tires and oil and stuff like that, arguments about that. I just quit talking to people about stuff like that a long time ago because I discovered you can't win those arguments. We try to tell people don't show up with a tubeless system, and you're not going to win those arguments. The people that ask you questions about that are generally not asking a question because they really want to hear something that they don't know or haven't already thought about. They're looking for confirmation of something that they already think. And if you don't provide that confirmation, well, they're just not going to listen to it. So we'll tell you what we think, and there are plenty of people. I put it all on the website. This is the way I think you need to prepare. We talk about it a lot on PBR Monday. We'll do a whole equipment thing. I've got my personal rig out there in the forum. Everything that I carry on the tour, I listed. And most people agree with me on that. Not everybody. And there have been some people who who've done the tour that did not follow my recommendations. Although in the end, generally they understand why I made them a lot more. They may still disagree with it, but there was one guy that did the tour a few years ago, pro level rider, brilliant rider, said, in the beginning I only agreed with about 50% of what you said, but by the time I got to the end, I agreed with 85%. The 15% on which we differed really doesn't matter. And I think that after you've done the tour, you will have a much better vantage point to see sort of why we said do it this way. Going into it, most people use as a template their prior experience, and they try to superimpose that over this. Since there is no really good template for the Tour of Idaho, that's really tough. So I understand why people are set in their ways, and I understand why they're insistent. And it's not going to make me dislike you or be angry with you or anything. Unless, when it doesn't work, somehow that's my fault. That bugs me a little bit. But that is another thing that hasn't happened very much in the past few years. So we talked a little bit about the tour. We talked a little bit about the vendors along the way. We talked a little bit about sort of why we recommend people who, the vendors that we recommend, the suppliers along the way. Let's talk a little bit about the people that you're going to run into as you do the tour, because I see some things that are popping up that people have run into so far this year. There's no problem in Malad. Hotel Malad is all ready to to meet you. There's a parking lot down there. There's directions on the website where you can leave your car for 10, 12, 14 days, whatever. No problem with accommodations in Pocatello. There's all kinds of places to stay there. All kinds of places to stay in Arco. There's 4 or 5 little hotels in Arco. In Chalice, there's 3 or 4 hotels. Again, there's no problem there. In Salmon, once again, no problem with hotels there. There's a whole bunch of them. Smoky Bar Store is the only place at the end of day 3. So whatever you do, you make sure that you book that well in advance and make sure that you don't do anything to tick my friend Kaylin off. Because there's no place else to stay, and the bears and the mountain lions that are right outside your back door are mighty hungry. When you get to the end of day 6, you are in what's the name of the little town? North Fork, the village at North Fork. There are other places to stay around North Fork. There's several other places within 4 or 5 miles up and down that road, but the village at North Fork, I think, is the best. In some of the other places, they have like small cabins that you can rent, but most places you're going to be sleeping on the ground. At North Fork, you're going to get a nice bunk. After that, you can stay in Elk City if you want to, but it makes day 8 a lot longer. Up in Lowell, there's always a lot of confusion about Lowell. The gas station there closed, which is unfortunate, so you got to carry gas out of Elk City anyway. As far as I know, the Wilderness Inn is still open, but they're just not open this time of year. They wait until a little later in the season before they open up. So just, keep trying to contact them. Last year, they finally started answering the phone around May. I think that Three Rivers is now accepting accommodations again as well. So there's 2 places in Lowell potentially to stay, and you should be able to book at one of those 2 places. The next place, the place at the end of day 8, is Laksha Lodge at Powell Ranger Station. It's a great big fancy place. You have to book there months in advance. You should be booking that right now because you're going to find already they're going to have weeks that are blocked off. Like Sturgis week is a rough week to try to find something there. Oh, and by the way, in Chalice, if it's not already up on the website, it will be pretty soon. You got to be really careful about the week of the Braun Brothers reunion, which is generally the second week in August. For about 3 days, Chalice is completely sold out, and it's basically impossible to find a room there. I had some guys a few years ago that managed to get an Airbnb, but I think it cost them through the nose to do it, so be aware of that. But Laksha Lodge has already got probably dates blocked out. Donna's the same way. That Sturgis week is a little funky for her, so when you get to Wallace, if you want to be able to stay at the Ryan, you're going to want to make those reservations early. Now, there are other places to stay in Wallace. It's a bigger town. And then finally, right up at the end of the tour, I think it's the Eagle's Nest is the place we recommend if you want to spend one final night up there waiting for your shuttle. And it's up in Priest River. I've never had anybody that had any trouble getting a room there. So those are the accommodations that we recommend along the way. I generally have those folks on to talk to you at some point during the year to tell you what's going on. All of the people that you're going to meet at these places are wonderful. Make sure that you tell them when you book your room that you're probably going to be getting in kind of late. They'll leave the key, under a pillow in the room for you. There's 1 or 2 places along the way that'll make a sandwich and leave it in your room if you get in late. Donna always has a plate ready for you. It's kind of cool. I see these pictures on Instagram where people have taken a picture of the plate that Donna has, welcome team so-and-so. Congratulations, because by the time you make it to Wallace, you've basically made it. If you fail on day 10, the gods are really angry at you for some reason because there's no reason for that to happen. Well, let's see here. Let's see what else. I see statements. I don't see any questions here. The new owners at Three Rivers are very accommodating. That's what I heard. I think I might know one of the people that bought the Three Rivers. That's a nice place. Three Rivers is way better than the Wilderness Inn if you can arrange to stay there. You might, if you're staying at Three Rivers, and this would not be a violation of tour rules, if you're staying at Three Rivers, you might even be able to talk them into, along with your room, supplying you with a 5-gallon can of gasoline. I would say that's just fine. That's not what I would consider to be outside help. I would consider that to be serendipity. A little bit about that too. Let's talk about what constitutes illegal outside help. Illegal outside help is something that you planned for. So you know that gas during this stretch is sparse, so you pay somebody to leave a gas can for you somewhere, or you arrange for somebody to meet you with gas. That's no bueno. Can't do that. But for instance, we tell everybody, when you go to Smoky Bar store, Kaylin doesn't have any gas pumps there, but I'm pretty sure she's got a little spare gas laying around, and that's fine. If you can work out an arrangement like that with her there, there's no problem with that. It's the same thing in Lowell. It's a pain in the butt to carry gasoline all the way from Elk City to Lowell so you can get through your day 8, which is a long day. If you all can work out some sort of a deal with the folks at Three Rivers or at the Wilderness Inn to have some gasoline for you there along with your accommodations, that's fine. Just tell everybody what you did so everybody else, as long as everybody's on even ground and we publicize it and we talk about it, we say this is okay, yeah, because everybody can do this. That's fine. I happen to know that on day 9, every year I can get gasoline. There's one campground right beside the trail on day 9 where I know I can get gas. I may have to eat a hamburger while the person is filling up my bike with gas, but I have never not been able to buy 5 gallons of gas there. And I just count on that. And I tell people every year, look, when you roll past this campground, it's always full of 40-foot toy haulers just like mine, and somebody there will give you some gasoline. You're going to be just fine. We'll help you out with stuff like that. What's not good is you started out as a team of 2, your partner retired, now your partner's shadowing you along the route, and every time there's a road crossing, he's showing up and handing you a sandwich and topping off your gas tank. That's quite illegal help. Let's see. Okay. Do you know if there's a place in Kalispell I could leave a trailer? My shuttle plans to have a guy pick up the trailer there and drive it over to call it to pick it up. Yeah, there's a place we talk about. It's on the website. It's not exactly in Kalispell, but it's even closer than that. There's a service station up there. And again, it's in the route description. That's very close to Colon and or 30 miles away. It's closer to Priest River. But there's a place where you can leave a rig parked for as long as you want. And they got a big parking lot out there. I was there just last summer, and I checked on it again. It's a service station / campground, and it is just south of Sandpoint. That's where it is. It's just south of Sandpoint. It's a few miles south of that big bridge going into town, and it's just before you take the road that takes you over to Priest River. And again, it's in the route description, so you can look that up. Let's see. Donation station. You want to donate to the Tour of Idaho, spend money at these businesses along the way, and get a saw and go saw some stuff. Every year, people are very generous. People send me money all the time and say, we really appreciate what you do. That goes straight into the sawing fund. If money shows up in my Venmo account, I give it to either take it and put it in the saw gas, or I pay guys to go out and saw. The very best way that you can do something for the tour, and tour vets always want to give back, go saw some trail. I have a really hard time getting way up north, especially, because that's a long way from me. For me to drive up to that day 8, 9, 10 stuff, that's a full day. It's an 8-hour drive from Pocatello on the freeway for me to get there. So I don't get up there very often, once a season if I'm lucky, and it's difficult for me to saw all that. So you way up north, guys, I know there's a lot of you that, come down from Washington State and northern Idaho and stuff like that. You know where the tour route is? Go out and saw that stuff. Go out and saw Lundy Ridge this year and the Rock Garden Trail so the first team through doesn't have to saw it. That's the way that you take care of the Tour of Idaho community. Get involved. Go out and do the things that anybody can do. And anybody can, if you can ride the Tour of Idaho, you can darn sure go out on a basically unloaded bike with a saw and a couple tanks of saw gas and saw some trail. That's the way you help us out. Great karma if you saw. True, sawing is critical. It is. In Idaho, that trail sticker you have to buy goes to fund trail crews, and those guys are really good. They know about the Tour of Idaho. Those guys are some of those guys are friends of mine. They really try to take care of us, but they can't just be all taking care of Tour of Idaho trails. And since most of their money comes from quad users, ATV users, the UTV users, they have to spend a lot of time maintaining those trails too. But in the past few years, as the tour have grown, we generally have tour vets that are out there every year sawing some of that stuff. This year I'm feeling fine. My medical problems of last year are in the past, and I think I'm going to be able to spend a lot of time from June all the way until the tour opens going out and sawing trails. Then once the tour does open, I'll be out exploring, trying to figure out what I'm going to do for the 2022 tour. But the doctor gave me a complete go-ahead to start riding on my last checkup a couple weeks ago. And my first big ride is going to be down in California with a couple of friends of mine who are tour vets in a couple of weeks. We're going to go riding in the Mojave so I can start breaking in this new hardware I have in my right hip. Yeah, Mark, we do a calendar every year. As I told everybody before I left on vacation, and perfectly understandable if you didn't get this because it comes out in snippets, but we do a Google Calendar every year, and probably I'll get it up sometime in April. It'll be up a couple of months before the final date to apply for a 2021 tour. So every year we do a Google Calendar. It's open to the public. All you need to know is the link. You can go in, and it's when everybody's on the trail, and I'll get that going sometime in April. I guarantee that I will have it done before the end of April. And the deadline is June, so it'll be up for a full month before you absolutely have to declare your intent to try a 2021 tour. Is it summer yet? No. In fact, it's supposed to be spring, but right now it's snowing to beat the band outside. So we got about 10 minutes left tonight, and I didn't have anything particular to talk about tonight, just sort of a general overview of the tour. The one thing I probably haven't covered is what's different between 2020 and 2021. The route's a little bit different, although it's not hugely different. The rules are a little bit different this year. This year, for the first time in the 16, 17-year history of the tour, we are going to insist that you don't use routes or tracks. It's always been against the rules to use tracks, basically, because a track is something that is created by somebody's GPS unit. So in order for you to have a track that you were following, you would have had to get it from somebody else, which means that you didn't do your own navigation. That's always been against the rules. I'm aware that not everybody has followed that rule, but, so what? You can't bust everybody. Most people, however, are very good about that. They really do all their own nav. But what a lot of people have done in the past is they've built routes, and I've always recommended against that. So I kind of don't understand the hue and cry late last year when I said we're going to ban that practice, because I've always talked about what a bad idea that is. You do not want to create your own routes. That's not a good use of your time preparing for the tour. You are much better off reconciling the waypoints that are out there and adding to the waypoints that I have provided if you feel you need to. I forget what I said the maximum number of waypoints you could use was, but it was pretty generous over the number that I provide. There's no way you're going to need more waypoints than A, what I provided, B, the extra, 100 a day or whatever it was, 50 a day. I forgot what the number was, but I gave you a huge number of waypoints that you could insert yourself. So feel free to add to the waypoints that I have in there up to the allowed number. And again, I think you'll have a hard time exceeding that number. But here's the one thing I would absolutely not do. You absolutely should not change any of my waypoints. My waypoints are where they are for a reason. And if you don't see the reason looking at it on the aerial photos or the maps, you'll know it when you get there. So if you move one of my waypoints, you do that at your considerable peril. You can put another waypoint close to it where you think it needs to be if you want to, but I wouldn't move any of mine. Okay, so if we decide to ride up a group size, try to get an extra CP, you can't do that this year. That's one thing I said we're going to abandon. If you're a soloist, you're going to ride the solo route. If you're a member of a two-person team, you're going to ride the two-person route, unless one of your team members drops out. Then the day after, you can drop down and ride the one-person route. In fact, you're going to ride the one-person route. There was so much confusion years past and people trying to double dip, so to speak, the routes are all different. The one person, two person, three person routes are all different. And so what people would try to do is poach, a team of two would try to poach a portion of a three-person route that would get them an extra challenge point without riding the whole three-person route. And that doesn't make any sense. So what we're going to do this year is say, look, enough of that. If you're a soloist, you ride the solo route the whole way. If you get off on the two or three-person route and it gives you an advantage, that's a DQ. Because sometimes the two and three-person route is shorter at the end of the day. Those people did more work than the soloist did, so we cut them a break. So if you're a soloist, you will ride the solo route from start to finish. If you are a member of a two-person team, you will ride the two-person route from start to finish. If you are a three-person team, you will ride the three-person route from start to finish, unless a member of your team retires. If a member of your team retires, the next day you must ride the route that is appropriate for the number of people that you have left. So let's say you have a team of two. You get to Pocatello. One of your team members drops out. You are a soloist starting on day two, and you must ride the solo route the rest of the way. If you're a member of a team of three, you get the Smoky Bar Store. Somebody bails. You're riding the two-person route the rest of the way. So when you're doing your preparation, you need to make sure that not only do you study the route that your team is going to ride if you're on a team, but make sure you study the other alternatives as well. Make sure that you include all those. They're all in the waypoint files, but make sure that you've spent some time looking at those other routes as well. There's two reasons for doing this. The first reason I already explained is because there were way too many people that were trying to nobody was doing this maliciously. Nobody was trying to cheat or anything like that. But people would say, hey, if I ride up a level from here to here, that looks like a really easy way for me to get not only the point for riding up a level, but look, I also get this extra challenge point. Well, no, that's double dipping. And it just ended up being way too much to explain and to talk about all the time. So I'm just going to make it simple to eliminate all that. There will be bonus sections this year. They're already, if you're looking at the waypoint files, they're already out there. And there's more bonus sections this year than there were last year. So if you need extra points, you can always ride an extra challenge section. Every extra challenge section is worth an extra point above the ones that you're required to do. So if you're required to do two, you got to do those. But if you ride a third one, that will give you an extra point. It's the same thing with these bonus sections. Every bonus section you ride gives you an extra point, and we're going to make a ton of these available. Now, don't want to get too much into this because we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but you got to be really, really, really careful about bonus sections because last year people really knackered themselves trying to ride all the bonus sections early on. I want to sort of, I want to be like a squirrel, and squirrel away a bunch of nuts in my tree, in my nest here, so that later on, if I run into lean times, I'll have all these points in my back pocket. Your first goal is to get through each day. And if you don't get through that day, you're screwed. So I would be really careful about which trails I chose for bonus points. Some are worth it, others are not. We'll talk about the strategy there a little bit later. I use a time limit. I say, look, I'll ride this trail for bonus if I'm here by, let's say, 2 in the afternoon. If I make it by 2, I can do this bonus, and I can still get to where I need to be before dark or in early enough that I get up early the next day. That's the way you got to think about these bonus sections. And, awfully talented riders show up every year, and they underestimate the amount of time it's going to take just to ride the nominal trail. So I would wait to start thinking about bonus sections until we start talking about them day by day. Then again, I would say, look, the only way I'm going to ride this is if I run across it early enough in the day, I'll do it. Set yourself a cutoff time. If you make it by then, do it. If you don't make it by then, don't. You don't need any bonus points unless something goes wrong. So if nothing goes wrong, you're not going to need those bonus points anyway. So I wouldn't worry about trying to squirrel away a whole bunch of them. I'd ride the easy ones and the ones that I got to in time. All right. Let's see. Okay, somebody already answered Ralph Joseph's question. That's good. You know what? We're running up on about an hour here, so I got about another minute here. If I see another question, I'll answer it. If not, I'm going to sign off for tonight. I hope the audio and video was good tonight. I checked my internet connection before I got on. It looked like it was rocking along pretty good, but you just never know. I will, once again, have all of the waypoints and map files up in the next day or so. Then I'm going to start working on the route book, which is what I call the route description. Every year I write up a route description, and then I put a link where it's in PDF format so you can just basically download the whole thing in PDF and take it with you. This year I'm going to make it less wordy, and I'm going to make it more visual. So I'm going to use a trick that climbers use, and I'm going to make like little route topos of the day with compass bearings and just sort of draw it out by hand on a little strip that you could just keep advancing from day to day. And I think that'll make more sense than a lot of the written description. The written description will still be there, but I'm going to depend a little bit more on more of a visual aid that I think will help you out. TrailTech Voyager Pro now can upload base maps, if I'm not mistaken, with motor vehicle use maps in them. If you're a TrailTech Voyager Pro user, that's something that's pretty cool, having those motor vehicle use maps in them. Now, those maps are worthless for your only method of navigation. If you all are looking at my waypoints and you're superimposing the MVUM layers over them, you'll notice that every once in a while my waypoint is way far away for where that motor vehicle use map says the trail is. And if you look on the aerial photos, you're going to notice my waypoint happens to be on the trail, and where the trail is on that map is wrong. But nonetheless, those MVUMs are a very useful reference. It's a layer that you should be aware of because in many cases it's kind of useful. All right. Well, that's it for tonight. Thanks for spending an hour with me. I consider it just an absolute honor that you all want to spend an hour listening to me on Monday nights. I really mean it. I'm really looking forward to this year because I can kind of participate again. I feel better now than I felt in 15 years. This new hip and getting a few other things fixed really took a lot of years off my life. And I feel good. I feel like I could ride a motorcycle again. And I really want to get out this year and do as much physical labor as I can trying to help prep the trails to get you guys through it. So I'll post a topic for the next PBR Monday sometime in the next few days. Let me think about a good topic for next Monday night. We'll start having some guests on here and there, and that'll be that. But anyway, start getting stoked. Right now is the time to start thinking really hard about what's going to happen in July and August and the first part of September. I think we may get through another year without having a lot of big wildfires along the way. The forecasts, the early ones, are looking pretty good. I think we might be able to even get stuff cleared a little earlier this year than we have in some years past. So it's looking like a good season. I think this year you might be able to have a reasonable shot of success by that last week in July. But we'll talk about all that in the future. Once again, thanks a lot for spending Monday night with me. I'm going to have another PBR here. I got some great shine when I was back in Kentucky. Holy cow. I should have brought that down here tonight. All right, next week. Be seeing you.